This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
We also welcome our returning celebrity guest, the host of the Revisionist Almanac podcast. You know him from his previous appearance on Gaslight. He's our resident Scooby-Doo villain. It's Andrew Korn.
That's Sweet Dick Andrew to you.
Is that a pet name?
We also welcome our newest celebrity guest, creator of Math Teacher Movies, at Math Teacher Movies on Instagram and Letterboxd, co-host of the Guy at the Movies podcast with Joe and Sean. We welcome Sean Phillips.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here. Apologies to anyone who may not like my audio. I'm working from a cell phone because I don't know anything about technology.
It works.
You're a
As
math
long
teacher,
as-
not IT.
Yeah.
It is unbelievable that I am the best. I am the ambassador of technology in my family, but I am also the worst one. So it's a lot of, I don't know.
As you may know, first-time guests to the show have to go through the gauntlet of questions. We have a 3-pack of questions that everybody seems to hate, but Sean, with all new guests to the show, we like to ask a few questions to allow the audience to get to know you. So first up, just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you love movies.
Well, I am a math teacher, if not dictated through the name. I'm a high school math teacher. I am a father of an 8-month-old and a probably 3-year-old dog. He's a rescue, so we don't know. Other than that, why do I love movies? Because I need to escape reality, because reality does suck. And that's why I normally see them in a dark theater, because reality is terrible. And so I need to get out of the rat race and just enjoy myself. And I don't know. Why did I love them from the beginning? Because I've always had an imagination. And so the confirmation of other people having sick and twisted imaginations, helps out.
So everybody's least favorite question of these 3, what is your favorite movie and why? And if you say Reality Bites, that's going to be so fitting.
Okay, that would actually work for this one. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. It always fluctuates between Network and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I think Network is probably one of the greatest screenplays of all time. I think Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, whenever I was depressed in college, I would pop that on and, then my roommates would leave. And, or Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which I just end that movie every time on my feet. And especially, I don't know if it's depressing looking at that movie now with the political cynicism, or it's just great. But either way, it's good to escape what politics was back in the day, or what it still is now.
Wasn't Butch Cassidy the first movie you saw in theaters, Pop?
Yes.
Nice.
Wow.
I think it was a re-release, though, right? In the early
Correct.
70s.
It was a re-release
Jesus, I
after
hope so.
the Academy Awards. It came out. It was re-released. I think it was May or June after the Academy Awards, and I made my mom take me to see it because we had just been out west, and I got into all of the Wild West stories, and so we went to see it.
So I would love to see that in theaters. I got it one of these days.
Yeah, it was for I think I was about 8. We'd been to the outdoor theater when I was younger, but somewhere in that area, 7 or 8, when he's telling, okay, teacher woman, keep going. Boy, for an 8-year-old.
Oh, boy.
You got away with seeing a lot of stuff you shouldn't have as a 7 or 8-year-old boy.
Try more like 5 or 6-year-old. My parents would never screen anything, so I was watching Laugh-In. I thought it was funny, but now I watch reruns of it, and I'm going, oh my God, my parents let me watch this?
It was really tough as a new father this year, where I was watching episodes of Shogun, and my daughter started to turn to the TV, and I was like, oh, is she receiving this right now? Because I should definitely turn this off.
Yeah, which beheading or massive amounts of violence is, not the best. Oh, we have another guest.
Yeah, little Scooter's here to hang out.
So the last of our 3 questions. Unfortunately, you're at the end of your journey. What is your favorite color? No. What is a good movie for you?
I mean, it's still tough because the premise of this podcast is on this rating scale and this rubric, and as a math teacher, you'd think I'd be grading on a very specific rubric, but really, I am someone that goes by feeling alone, and I just if it's something that just makes me feel good, that's what gets the A. And so a lot of times, people say I overdo the A's, and I definitely do. Like my letterbox is like a weird step ladder, but I just really do like when I just feel good about a movie. That's what keeps me going with it. And so, sometimes I'll feel terrible about a movie and give it an A. Like I didn't go walk out of zone of interest skipping, but it is just like something that generates the most amount of feeling. And we could get into the technical stuff, which we will on this podcast, and I'm also happy to discuss that stuff. But a lot of times it's just I love just like when something with all that technical stuff that incorporates it generates a feeling. That's where I'm the happiest.
Total vibes viewer.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, shall we dive into our evening here? For our 223rd episode, we discuss one of the most critically acclaimed racial relations films ever, with Do the Right Thing from 1989. Directed and written by Spike Lee, music by Bill Lee, starring Spike Lee as Mookie, Danny Aiello as Sal, Ossie Davis as DeMare, Ruby Dee as Mother Sister, Giancarlo Esposito as Buggin Out, Bill Nunn as Radio Raheem, John Turturro as Pino, Richard Edson as Vito, Roger Guinevere Smith as Smiley, Rosie Perez as Tina, Joy Lee as Jade, Steve White as Ahmad, Martin Lawrence as C, Robin Harris as Sweet Dick Willie, Paul Benjamin as ML, Frankie Faison as Coconut Sid, and Samuel L. Jackson as Mr. Senior Love Daddy. Recognition for this movie, Do the Right Thing, was released on May 19th, 1989 at the Cannes Film Festival. At the time of the film's release, both Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert ranked the film as the best of 1989, and later each ranked it as one of the top 10 films of the decade, number 6 for Siskel and number 4 for Ebert. However, the film did not enjoy widespread critical acclaim, as many controversies at the time surrounded the film, as well as backlash from white critics and industry people to the racial content depicted in the film. Nevertheless, Do the Right Thing was a breakthrough for Spike Lee and eventually garnered him a nomination for Best Original Screenplay at the 1990 Academy Awards, and for Danny Aiello for Best Supporting Actor. Moreover, since its original release, Do the Right Thing has become a critical and industry darling, as a touchstone of films that should have won Best Picture over the actual winner in a given year. The AFI has also recognized the film in AFI's 100 Years, 100 Songs, Fight the Power at number 40, and AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies, the 10th anniversary edition, at number 96. In 2022, the film was included in the Sight and Sound poll of the greatest films of all time at number 24 among critics and number 29 among directors. In 1999, Do the Right Thing was selected for the National Film Registry. Do the Right Thing currently holds a 92% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 93 score on Metacritic, and a 4.4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So as we start each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
I was aware of it. I'd seen bits and pieces. I watched it for our first episode in full, and now I watched it again.
Mine is not particularly complicated either. I watched this for the first time during the pandemic. It was one of the last films, I want to say last like 20 films I accomplished to cross off everything off of the AFI list on both the 1998 and 2007 Redux version. And I watched it again for our original episode. But all right, Sweet Dick Andrew, what is your relationship to this film? I know you've been burning for this question.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm from a very small, rural Midwest town with almost zero diversity. So I had no exposure to African American films or that culture really growing up. So I probably saw this late teens. I was kind of catching up on, and on the previous episode, I kind of talked about this when I mentioned my favorite film of all time is Goodfellas. Late teens, I was kind of catching up on all the sort of stuff that cinephiles kind of point towards as the greatest films of all time, and this was one of those films. And it was like a bomb exploded because I had been exposed to nothing like this in my own world, and seeing sort of the racial tension and everything was just kind of very eye-opening for me, because a lot of the people that I grew up with, I didn't realize how systemic racism was inherently in the little small white community that I'm from. And seeing this movie and seeing some of the language that Sal and his sons use, it just kind of hammered home, some of the things I had been exposed to without even realizing it. And then obviously this kind of opened a whole new world for me in terms of, understanding cultures that I wasn't familiar with. So just a really seminal moment I remember as a late teen. The first time I saw this just caught me by surprise, took my breath away.
You mean you haven't traveled east of the border and gone to East St. Louis lately?
I don't make a habit of going to East St. Louis, that's for sure. But I definitely went there in my 20s. There's no doubt about that.
Okay. Sean, as the newest member of this gang, how did you come to this movie?
So like you, it was actually a pandemic watch. I always try, it's always one of the shameful, like, never watched it kind of movies. And like, even more specific than the pandemic, this was, right around the time of George Floyd. And I don't think we remember that was a very slow trickle when that happened. It was like, wow, something's happening in Minnesota. And then all of a sudden the video comes out. And there were also like other killings happening around that. And so I actually can't remember if I saw this before or after, or like as the news was coming out on George Floyd. And I just remember being stunned. And I like, because it's just like, oh, wow, this was 10, 20, like 30 years ago almost. And it's a exact reflection of what was happening then, like kind of to a scary degree. I just remember saying like, wow, I didn't know about this stuff in the 80s. I didn't know about this stuff growing up. I also, like private schools, white towns, and, very, very similar kind of upbringing. Yeah, it's one of those things where it like kind of my jaw was on the floor. And, I'm grateful for this movie. And so then I rewatched it again for this second round of this podcast. I thought like, hey, maybe I won't love it as much. Maybe it was just like the hype around it. Like there was just such an emotional time. And no, this movie still hits, and it hits so well, and it's just structured so well. So can't wait to talk about it.
Excellent. I mean, you mentioned it there, and I hate to usually preempt myself. Normally we save listener questions towards the end, but we did get one that I will kind of offer out because it introduces this movie a little bit better than I could. So thank you in advance to Peterson W. Hill, who will be a future guest on the show. Is this the most relevant American film ever made?
Yeah, I think that just because, and it's interesting, you have that whole thing on like white critics being upset about this, because when I looked at this through the 2020 lens, I was like, this isn't just like a favoring to the blacks. I mean, obviously, most of the white characters come off as somewhat racist, but this is something where everyone is angry at everyone, and like the real villain of this is, I guess, racism. I guess the police, but the real villain is the heat. And like the heat getting further and further, and you see that character almost pushing everyone towards each other. And I think that like there's just this anger throughout it. And the movie doesn't terribly have a resolution. And I think of another race-based movie that doesn't have a resolution that's much worse, called Crash. And like that one, for some reason, it's like, Crash doesn't have a resolution. It just leaves everything hanging. This doesn't have a resolution, and that's the resolution, is that there's really no solution to this thing. We have to cool off a little bit, and we have to figure out how to coexist. And that's the only solid messaging we have. But, it's kind of hung out like, this is how this is going to end, because this is how reality ends. And it's jaw dropping. And it's so tricky to say the quintessential American movie, because, a part of me wants to say Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, because, damn the man. But I think this is it.
I know this is going to be particularly difficult to answer this question given the totality of American film. Obviously, we're dealing with like 100 years worth of significant films. It's hard to put your finger on one and say, this is it. I would say that my initial reaction to this question upon seeing it was absolutely not, because how could you say anything is the quintessential American film? But there is a thought as to whether this is America 2.0. So to understand or to separate what I mean by that, there's a group of historians who seem to treat from a political philosophy that there was one America that was founded roughly from like 1776 up through about 1960. And that since then, as we become a multiracial coalition of democratic people, we formed America 2.0. And if you, under that banner, you're saying, is this the most relevant American film to that America 2.0? I would have to say yes, because it's the only one that's truly dropping a notice. Here's how we interact normally. And here's how to understand the racial conflicts between the Koreans, the Puerto Ricans, the blacks, the whites, everybody who was an immigrant. And none of you were here originally. And you're all in this boiling pot with racial tensions all over, angry at everybody and everything. And then doesn't do anything about it. It just says, there's a problem. Here it is.
Let's put it this way. Okay. America was founded on the basis that there was going to be inequality among the races. I mean, after all, our Constitution says that blacks are counted as 3/5 human. The Civil War was able to resolve it politically, and the power between the states and the federal government and how it was going to be. Reconstruction was supposed to resolve some of the racial tensions. It instead heightened it and then abruptly ended without it being fixed. And we kind of let it stew for another 100 years before finally we got around to a bunch of black leaders saying we had enough and starting a movement to change that. And this is the culmination. So I think what we're seeing is that last streak of racial issues coming to head, and it's the perception among a group of particular white individuals who feel that they're losing control, and so there's a lot of backlash going back and forth. Is this the quintessential American film? It depends on what you're talking about, because America is so diverse. You know, there's a reason why we have like 7 different styles of barbecue in the United States, because it's just
try like 37. But
yeah,
okay.
well, you know, you have Memphis has one, Kansas City has one, Texas has one, South Carolina has one, North Carolina one has a different one. And it's
Florida
just ridiculous.
has a different one. Alabama has a different one. Yeah,
That's the one thing I kept trying to explain to the exchange students that we used to host, is that America is really probably about 150 different countries all blended into one, because they talk differently. I used to have friends in college who were from all over New England, and I could tell where everyone was from, because there's slightly different accent between Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And I could tell the difference. So, no, I can't say that's a quintessential American film, because I'm not sure there is one all-encompassing. I saw racial tensions on a everyday basis, so it means less to me. I related to this movie very well and understood it, but it wasn't quite as stark and ominous as it probably is to someone who never had that experience.
I would say it's probably the most challenging American film of the last, 50 or more years, just in terms of us as a society dealing with ourselves. Look at the state of the world right now, with one of our presidential nominees being part African American, like that, and there's already this emotion because of that, and it's the movie is going to be relevant until the end of American history, it feels like, because in 35 years not a damn thing's changed in terms of the real racial tension that's kind of always been bubbling underneath. And I think that this movie does a really interesting job of holding up a mirror to us as Americans and forcing us to deal with it. I think Sean hit the nail on the head, where it doesn't come to a satisfactory resolution in the correct way. Tom, I know you and I both watched the Rewatchables episode on Do the Right Thing, which is excellent, by the way. And Sean Fennessy even said on that one, he said, this movie cuts the bow instead of tying the bow. It feels more like a play than a movie, whereas a movie tends to kind of wrap things up nice and succinctly. Plays often kind of leave you with things that are lingering out there and make you question things and make you think about them after the fact. And I think in a lot of ways, Do the Right Thing is that kind of a film where it does feel like a play more than a film.
Until you watch the cinematography.
Well, I mean, it's got masterful cinematography, but in terms of the narrative structure of it, I think it's a play in terms of the words and the dialogue.
It is interesting because I wondered, and I had to do the research, like, when I first watched this, I'm like, is this based off of a play? Just because it has the one setting, it has everything there. It's like, oh no, he created this script, which is terrifying, and it's like this had to come from a mind, but it does have that, like, there are characters at different parts. I could see this being adapted into a play if it hasn't been already, where there's a spotlight on the three. I like to call them the three wise men, because those are like the three. Like you see those guys posted up at diners and donut shops where they just stay there all day, and they're just the wise men. I love those guys, and so, but then you see every single aspect of this, and they could make something out of it. Yeah, it's like it does have that sort of like play. And the ending of the resolution of an extremely depressing resolution, which unfortunately most plays have.
So, Andrew, if they're the three wise men, which gift does Sweet Dick Willie bring?
I think the first two words told you right there.
Ruex.
I'm frankincense.
Yeah.
Oh, you're frankincense. Okay. Yeah. Bringing up that Tyson. Catholic school upbringing.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. So what is this movie about? Let's tackle that chestnut.
I always start talking before I know my answer. It's about racism. That's a really high school kid answer of someone who just watched the movie and just said, I don't know, man. It's about anger. They're angry. They're not, I mean, they say racist things, and it's difficult to say who's racist and who's not anymore because it's become such a buzzword, but they're angry. And I think that could be a cop-out for a lot of these characters. It's about a real-world white savior. Danny Aiello is like what a white savior would be in the real world, where, we have those white saviors in a lot of movies, and that's also another buzzword in film. He's like, he's saying like, Mookie, you're a friend here, or your family here. You'll also take over the pizzeria. And then 2 minutes later, he uses the N-word on people that like play music too loud. And it's interesting that like, oh, that's what the white savior. That's when we go into the deep recesses. But it's because he was angry. Still doesn't excuse it at all. But everyone is just so angry at each other, and I think that like it is just it's an anger that incites into racism.
Yeah, I would say the movie is about human emotion when it really boils down to everything, and the love-hate kind of sums it all up, where there's equal parts of both of us, equal parts of both emotion in all of us, and it paints humanity in a really dark light, but I think that is a very correct assessment of who a lot of us are at our core, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think every character in the movie could probably be seen through a love-hate type of relationship, whether that's Tina loving and hating Mookie, or mother-sister and the Demare having this love-hate relationship. Ultimately, it comes down to, the the community loves and hates Sal's Pizzeria.
Well, and they're two separate emotions. Remember, the opposite of love or of hate is not the other. It's apathy.
It just comes down to, like, I always think about these two people, especially, like, these two are characters in there, sort of. It's MLK and Malcolm X, and that picture is so quintessential because those two, he was the nonviolent protester, MLK was, and Malcolm X was the one that, like, inspired hatred. You dig deeper into those two, you find out there's a lot more complexity even in, Spike Lee's Malcolm X movie. And you find out there's a lot more there. But there's a complication there. It's not just simply love and hate. It's not just simply the right hand or the left hand. And it is that, those two contain multitudes, and their public personas might have been, love for MLK and hate for Malcolm X, but even they dove into each one before their deaths, like the opposite side of their public persona.
So is this the number one movie you'd suggest to anybody that wants to understand Spike Lee as a director?
100%.
I think this is the film that probably defines him the most in the public perception of him.
He is such an interesting director because he can be very, very, very messy. And I almost mean that as an absolute compliment. He has a style of an I don't give a fuck. And this is the one that is the most like straightforward, I think. This and maybe 25th Hour as well, even though they have their own unique ways. I look at something like The Five Bloods. I look at something like Malcolm X is crazy at times. Black Klansman is very, very, very crazy. And they're messy. And this guy does take these swings that sometimes connect, sometimes don't. And I mean, like, he's remaking an Akira Kurosawa movie. That fills me with, well, the left hand of hate. And I'm so damn mad about that. And yet I'm very curious and I want to see how that pulls off. Still very mad that he's reacting high and low. I don't know how he's going to be okay with that. But he's such a messy director. And I mean that as the highest compliments. And there's artistic flourishes that he uses all the time. And to say this is the quintessential one is, yeah, it's his best one. I mean, I think that's like sort of by a mile. And yeah, I would give it to this as the introductory movie, without a doubt.
Yeah, if he had to have a movie on his tombstone or whatever, or a title, this is the one that's synonymous with Spike Lee, and it always has been. I think it always will be. I think that Malcolm X is probably a close second, to be completely honest. I also think his criminally underrated film is one I just covered a couple of months ago on my show, Crooklyn from 1994, which is kind of an autobiography of him and his sisters. I would recommend people check that out. And I'm with Sean. There's a messiness to him that occasionally topples over into Old Boy, which is horrifically bad. And I'm afraid High and Low is going to go in that direction. But I do kind of like that he walks the tightrope, though. He's not afraid to take big swings. And I appreciate that about him, is he's always kind of stuck to his almost kind of like punk rock, that hip hop edge, like he just doesn't, he marches to his own beat. And I appreciate that about Spike.
So, Dad, are you ready to dig more into the film? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
I do. Do the Right Thing is a film set in the scorching summer heat of Brooklyn. It's a story that captures a single day in the lives of a neighborhood's residents, showcasing their joys, struggles, and the simmering tensions that come to a head. At the heart of the narrative is Sal's famous Pizzeria, a local institution run by Sal and his sons, Vito and Pino. As the day unfolds, we witness a mosaic of characters. Mookie, the pizza delivery man, Radio Raheem, whose boombox blasts Public Enemy's Fight the Power, Buggin Out, who demands representation on the pizzeria's Wall of Fame, and the mayor, the neighborhood's elder statesman. Through a series of interactions, misunderstandings, and confrontations, the heat and the bubbling racial tension reach a boiling point, culminating in a tragic act of violence that forces the community to confront the complexities of race, identity, and justice. Do the Right Thing is a raw, unflinching look at the choices we make and the consequences that follow, urging viewers to reflect on what it truly means to do the right thing.
Thank you. Did you know? Despite DeMare, Ozzie Davis, and mother sister, Ruby D, being enemies in the film, the actors were actually husband and wife in real life and frequently performed together until Davis's death in 2005. Did you know? Rick Aiello, who played Officer Long in the movie, which, if you don't know which one that is, it's the one who actually chokes Radio Raheem to death, is the real-life son of Danny Aiello, who played Sal. Did you know? The building Sal's Pizzeria was in did not exist before shooting. Rather, it was constructed on an empty lot by the production company and subsequently torn down after shooting wrapped. Did you know? The word fuck is used approximately 240 times in this film, an average rate of 2 per minute. I think
That's all?
Yeah, it feels like more. I mean, the battery scene alone probably ups that rate.
Well, yeah, when they outpace it in certain moments, yeah.
Yeah. Did you know? James Earl Jones was originally offered the role of DeMare, but turned it down in order to make Best of the Best. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. You know, there's nothing quite like wandering through the endless aisles of Home Depot, desperately trying to find that one tiny screw or mysterious doohickey that you need for your latest home project. You can never find anyone to help you, and every aisle looks the same. It's like being lost in a forest made entirely of lumber and disappointment. But hey, Why not make that soul-crushing experience a little more enjoyable? Introducing the greatest movie of all time podcast. Pop in those earbuds and let your favorite hosts guide you through the fascinating world of cinema while you hopelessly navigate the maze that is Home Depot. Picture this. You're standing in the plumbing section, staring blankly at a wall of pipes and fittings. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, you're chuckling along to a lively debate about whether The Godfather is truly the best movie ever made or if it's Citizen Kane that deserves the crown. Who needs to know the difference between PVC and CPVC when you're deep into a heated discussion about Tarantino's finest works? Or imagine this. You're on your 5th lap around the lighting section, still can't find the elusive light bulb. No worries, you're too engrossed in an episode breaking down the brilliance of The Shawshank Redemption to care. So next time you're wandering around aimlessly through Home Depot, feeling like Tom Hanks in Castaway, remember to bring the greatest movie of all time podcast. It's like having a couple of movie buffs keep you company, making the endless search for that darned widget just a little less painful. Because let's face it, folks, when it comes to Home Depot, we all need a little distraction. Greatest movie of all time podcast, making your home improvement hell a cinematic delight. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 224th episode, we welcome 2 new celebrity guests. The Question Queen Heather Stewart and Ryan Luis Rodriguez of the One Track Mind podcast to discuss our second Monty Python film, The Life of Brian, from 1979, celebrating its 45th anniversary. Directed by Terry Jones, written by the Pythons. There's like 7 people credited on the screenplay. Music by Jeffrey Burgin, starring John Cleese, Eric Idle, Terry Gilliam, and Michael Palin. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Also, before we jump back into the episode, let's give our guests a chance to plug their own stuff. So, Andrew, what is going on in your sweet dick world?
Oh, gosh, caught me off guard on that one. So, as always, you can find me on all the socials at Rev Almanac. I'm the creator and host of the Revisionist Almanac, and we go into past years and dig up the Oscars and revise them. And this episode will go up in the midst of our 2014 episode cycle, with voting just a few days away. Then in September, I have Tom and Dana on the show. We took a deep dive into 1942, and God help us, it was not fun. That was the year Mrs. Miniver won Best Picture. Dana seems like he had a lot more fun than I did. I did. I never want to do that again. I'm glad I won't have to. And I'll have Sean on early 2025. He's joining me for another year I'm terribly scared to dive into, 1956, which is Around the World in 80 Days, winning Best Picture. And I think every fucking movie from that year went 3.5 hours. So I'm very nervous to prep.
Isn't that the 10 Commandments year?
That's the 10 Commandments year.
Yes.
I'm watching a lot of these movies, and there's a lot of great ones. There's some dog shit stuff that year, dude. I am like really hating you for because I'm right now in one where like Fred McMurray has an affair, and it's not The Apartment. So I'm not right now.
You're right, though. There's a lot of good movies from that year that are not nominated at the actual Oscars, and so
the actual nominations and winners are going to be completely different.
Yes. We're going to be revising the hell out of 56, I have a feeling.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a movie not named Flubber where Fred McMurray isn't a shitheel?
Well, it's so weird because he was made famous by My Three Sons, where he was like a good old wholesome TV dad. And then every single other movie, he's like this absolute son of a bitch.
Double Indemnity.
We've covered many of those.
Caine Mutiny.
Yeah.
Oh, Caine Mutiny. I
Mutiny
actually haven't
great.
seen the original. I just saw the most recent one.
Mm.
The Kiefer
lovely.
Sutherland, yeah?
Yeah.
Friedkin's is really good.
Yeah.
We have The Apartment coming up next year already, and we did have somebody specifically write in and request to do that episode. So like a year and a half in advance, I scheduled a guest. Not that I haven't done that before. I technically have a guest scheduled for 2 seasons from now, but that's a different story.
And I should also say, Tom and Dana, you guys are both coming back again in 2025. You guys are going to join me for 1982, which is the year Gandhi won Best Picture. And again, yes. There's we've got The Thing, Blade Runner, Tootsie. There's so many good 82 films. Yeah. Good old Et.
Yeah, because you needed to spend 20 minutes watching Gandhi ride on a train to the shore to make salt.
Okay, first
Even
off,
Richard Attenborough hates that movie. He directed it. He was like, I shouldn't have won this. Give it to Spielberg. What the hell's wrong with you people?
it's not a bad movie. To quote 40-Year-Old Virgin, Gandhi baked is good.
Well, I'm gonna get really baked watching Gandhi.
Yeah, you should do that.
Okay,
Child-free weekend and watch Gandhi.
there you go.
But you also skipped over something. We're coming back for December, aren't we?
Yeah, you guys will be in December 1967, which is In the Heat of the Night, The Graduate, La Samurai.
Trying to take away my 5th appearance already so I don't get my
Dr.
hat?
Doolittle.
I watched Dr. Doolittle. I forgot it was so long and it has an intermission. Jesus Christ.
Oh, God.
I love
It's
that
an intermission?
it's like the greatest 4 Best Picture nominees, like the greatest 4 movies of all time, and then Dr.
And then
Doolittle.
Doolittle.
Absolutely the one that it's like the reader in
Bonnie and
It's like,
Clyde.
what the fuck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Sean, what do you got going on in your world?
Hell of a lot. Math teacher movies on Instagram. I hate X, but sometimes stuff seeps into that when I share it too much. But math teacher movies on Instagram. We have the Guy at the Movies podcast, which was rebranded to Smash Cuts podcast, which has now gone on a hiatus because Joe and I were just a little bit too busy. Him with work and me with tiny human, and so it's been a little bit tough getting the pod off the ground. It is a hiatus. We will be back sometime, indefinite, but we've been discussing how to return and come back better than ever. So we will be back there.
And I can confirm if anyone's listening to this and they do not follow Sean on Math Teacher Movies, you're missing out. His daily content's as good as it gets on IG, for sure.
Oh, bless you.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. So now we turn our attention to Ask Dana Anything. And I still haven't created the back sound for that, or that, what do they call it? The media clip. My idea was to get all our 5-time guests together and just do their own little recording of that and then mash those all together with the Tijuana Brass doing the background music.
I like it.
Yeah, game show style. But anyway, we received a very late entry to our Ask Dana Anything from our own VP Morris, 3-time previous guest on the show, at TWrightRepeat on Instagram and X. Does Dana know about Kendrick Lamar and Drake and their feud? And if so, what side is he on? This comes as you said last week, I should get points for knowing who Kendrick Lamar is. So I ask you, Dad, do you know about the Kendrick Lamar and Drake feud?
I know there is one. I have no idea what it's about. I just knew that there was one. And I don't know. Drake is Canadian, so I can't be on a non-American side. So that's about the best I can do.
Yeah, that's not the reason, but also great choice. Right. There's a worse crime than being Canadian that's occurring, and it's why he probably can't come back here, but...
Yes.
He can win Best Director, but...
I'm also supposed to ask you if you're having a brat summer.
I think it's a brat summer, right?
Yes. Up in Wisconsin, it's a brat summer. It's always a brat summer.
Yes. Brats are very good.
So thank you to VP, who will be our guest eventually, 2 seasons from now on Gilda. But we move into now, if you have not been with us before for any of our revisit episodes, we skip what's normally the middle section of our show, where we talk about best performances, best scene, and a lot of the quotes and other things that we would normally talk about a film. In fact, if you want any of that information, you can go to episode 101. It was our lead-off episode of our Black History Month celebration in 2022, so that would be in that February after we just covered The Godfathers. And I will say, I am very hesitant to ever compliment myself about a podcast or anything else, but I actually think that was one of our better episodes. I have to compliment myself a little bit, so a little golf clap for me. But otherwise, you can go back and listen to that for all of our original content on best scenes, best performances, etc. I recommend that episode. But we are here to revisit the Stanley rubric of it all. And so Legacy is up first. I will mention that on the original episode, we had an 8 for this. And because I know that one of our guests is all hot and bothered about all of our scoring, Andrew, did we get this right?
No, you guys are so wrong. It's crazy.
I just got it, Stanley Rubric. I've been reading that in the outline, and until you said it out loud, I didn't get it. I was like, "Who's Stanley?" Now I get it, Stanley Rubric. You should end it with a K, but that was my contribution.
Well, then it'd be Rubik's Cube.
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
So legacy is
okay, so to explain.
help me out here. Yeah.
All right. So roughly, we usually treat this as a category defining the industry and the audience appreciation of this particular movie within 5 years after the movie came out. So let's take 1989 through roughly 1993, 1994. Throw that out for just now. That will be considered for impact and significance. And we're just measuring what the legacy is of the movie from both an audience perspective, which is somewhat casual viewers, and the industry perspective, which is much more podcasters, critics, historians, inside or industry actual people inside Hollywood, directors, etc., and how they consider the film roughly from that period of time onward. So there are a lot of films that flopped in the moment that they were made. The Shining comes to mind, that were much bigger after the fact, that have kind of garnered a additional support well after the time that they were made and that they came out. This is measuring that. So we usually divide the category 5 and 5. 5 points for the industry, 5 points for the audience at large. I would say that I don't think that we got it terribly wrong, but I have it just slightly above where we were originally, if I were to be completely honest. I think that on an industry side of things, it's hard to say that this isn't a 5 now.
Yeah.
The industry holds this in very high regard. You know by its placement on the Sight and Sound poll that it's held up as probably one of the quintessential American movies, since there are a lot of international films that are just ahead of it. I don't think it's the top American film by any stretch. I think there's at least a good handful of Hitchcock and Kubrick and a couple of other ones that are in there ahead of it. But it's certainly in that maybe top 10 of American-made movies. Then there's your, Man with a Movie Camera and your Joan of Arcs and some of the other ones that kind of come in around there that I think are more critic darlings than anything else. John Dielman. And this one kind of comes in just after some of those. But the fact that in a list that's like 200 deep on both sides, the critics and the director's side, that it would come in the top 30 in both lists, I think stands a lot on what the industry thinks of this movie. And I don't think there's really a whole lot of naysayers in the industry at this point. There were when it originally came out. So I do think there will be a little bit of more to say on the impact and significance side of it when we get to that moment. But where this movie has an issue, I think, is in the audience at large. I'm caught between the people that know Spike Lee and the people that actually know this movie. I think there are a lot of people that know Spike Lee because of this movie and have impressions of him because of the controversy surrounding this movie, but don't necessarily know this movie, what it's about, or really anything to do with why he is the figure that he is. And so the difference between the perception of Lee since then and what this movie is, I have to kind of say that for film nerds, I would say almost universally have probably seen this movie. But the casual public, it is not seeped in. And so where I've been kind of falling on that is probably about a 3.5. So I'd have an 8.5 roughly.
So the only way I would push back a little bit with that, Tom, and I don't think you're wrong in your sentiment about the public, except I think, unfortunately, with 4 white guys on this podcast, we're all looking through it through a relatively narrow lens of our own perception of what we think the public is. When you think about the African-American community and culture, I would be willing to bet this is one of the most important films in history for their particular American culture. And I would argue it's almost always going to come up if you say, what's the defining black film, to an African-American person? I have to imagine Do the Right Thing comes up almost always. So I would say this can be no lower than a 4 on the public side. I would go as high as a 4.5, but I know, again, I'm a little skewed that way. I think this is at least a solid 9. I agree with you on the industry side. It's a slam dunk 5 out of 5. So I've got it at a 9 to a 9.5 personally, because, again, I think we're looking through a very narrow, white, middle-aged American lens, and there's a larger cultural appeal that this movie has that you have to accept.
Sorry, if I could just briefly
Go.
push back on your pushback. Anecdotally, so I'll limit it to the perspective that I have, but a lot of the friends from minority communities that I know of are much more likely to say an Eddie Murphy or a Denzel movie than they are this movie. That's more reticent of what the black, like, what is the quintessential black movie? Coming to America is probably going to come up where Beverly Hills Cop or Training Day before Do the Right Thing is.
Maybe a favorite film, but when you talk about, you say, what's, like, you could ask me what my favorite movie is, and it's different than if you say, hey, Andrew, what's the most important film in American history or whatever? You know, I think the favorite and the most important is different. And I think if you ask somebody who maybe says Beverly Hills Cop is their favorite, it's not nearly the most important film to a culture. Or so I think Do the Right Thing is a defining film to the African American culture at large, in my opinion. And I don't think that's waned one bit, because I think it's generational. I think it gets passed down from father to son, mother to daughter, whatever the case may be.
I think that's an intellectual way of potentially viewing it, because and it also depends on the age group, because if you said under 30s, maybe it might be Get Out.
Yeah, that's true.
The problem I have with that argument is that they already are living this. I don't know if they need a film to tell them what it is. This film is not for black people. And so I don't know if it really has that much relevancy within the black community. I could be wrong. Again, I mean, I'm a middle-aged white guy.
But the word isn't relevancy, it's legacy. Legacy is the defining trait of this film, and this film's legacy extends so far. It's an umbrella that everything else in African American filmmaking kind of has fallen under over the last 35 years, in my opinion. I think the legacy of this film is, like Peterson said, it's quintessential.
I mean, I don't know if I agree with you, Dad, on that it's not necessary for black people to see this, because I still think
That's
it
not
is
what I said.
Okay, then you're going to need to explain again then what you mean, because that's what I heard.
I don't think the point of the film is to raise awareness among the black community. I think they're aware of the racial tensions. I think this was to bring it to light among white people that there is this underlying hostility, this anger that's brewing, and to make it clear that this kind of tension could bubble over. And it's especially within areas of America that do not have minority populations.
I think that only makes the legacy stronger, to my point, Dana, is if you're saying it's bridged over into white culture and shown how important these issues are, its legacy is even greater than I was giving credit for. I think you're actually making the stronger point for my legacy score.
I don't agree with that, because I don't know if the film is responsible for any of that, so much as just literally you turn on the news every day and it's hard to not see this happening across America. Now, how much we're faced with it on a more regular basis, I think, has become stronger. But is that a credit to Spike Lee in this particular movie? No, not necessarily. I mean, I'm not going to discredit it either, because I think his overall body of work has probably laid some track and some groundwork, along with other, groundbreaking minority individuals that are also trying to publicize certain things within the community, so that they've gotten a bigger megaphone over time. But is this the thing that, I guess, spurs that on? Again, from a legacy perspective, how many people are actually going to say that they've seen the film and that they know of the film? And that's my contention. I guess we're not quibbling over the legacy within the industry. It's a legacy with the public at large. And that usually seems to be what this category comes down to.
Really quickly, I would just say, like, in terms of if somebody's seen it, I think there are a lot of people, maybe 30 or younger, who have never seen Casablanca, but they know it, and the legacy is the same as Do the Right Thing. Just because maybe everyone hasn't seen it, again, it's anecdotally been passed down now for a generation, 35 years. This movie lives in the culture every day.
Sean, let's throw you in here. You haven't had a say yet.
For once, you guys managed to shut me up. It's pretty impressive. It's so tricky for me because I kind of see what Dana's saying. I'll even like add to that where this film, for lack of a better phrase, sort of does reach across the aisle, which is something you wouldn't expect from Spike Lee. You expect fist in the air radical, and that's not what this movie is. And I think that I always think about, we have this debate all the time about, when riots happen and there's destruction of property, it's like, well, you care more about like a CVS burning down instead of a black man getting killed. And I think what this movie does, and especially that final conversation they have together, where, on one hand, horrible that someone died, and on the other hand, it's horrible that Danny lost his, Sal, lost his pizzeria. And I think you see the pain in both of those aspects. And so it's so funny when I look at like the white, I think I already said this, but when I look at the white critics hating this, I'm like, this was something that really did like bridge or could have and didn't, but could have bridged a certain gap. And I think if you look at this movie now where, things have cooled, and I think if it gets put in front of people, that's the tricky thing. And that's the hardest part, is this movie being put in front of people. Right now, it's streaming on Peacock, which I think only people are like watching the Olympics for. Gold Zone rules, by the way. Before this, in July 31st, when I rented this, which was great that I found out that I could have put it on freaking Peacock, but it's tough to come across people's eyes. Like this shows up on Netflix, and I know that it's difficult to get on certain streaming services, so I'm not even going to get into that business. But if this shows up on Netflix, I would love to see what it does. Would it get in that top 10? Would it be number one? Would the youth see this? And I said youth like I'm 700 years old. But would the youth actually see this? And what would they think of it? And I do think that if it came across their eyes, they would love this movie. And yes, we turn on the news and we see this every day. But you look at that third act, and it is some of the most powerful shit you could ever see. And I think that it's more powerful than any news story you get. And you get the personal aspect of it. And you know what? Then you get the people like when Sal's is burning and they're chanting Howard Beach, which is something I had to fucking Google. And I found out that this was basically what this was based on in a very, very loose sense. And I all of a sudden wonder, I'm like, you're right. This is not like they will watch Get Out instead, which, good. Get Out friggin' rules. But like they probably will watch Get Out. They will watch Beverly Hills Cop. They will watch. But if this were to get in front of kids' eyes, what would they think? And that is like, it's the thing that none of the four of us know and no one really knows. But if this was put on a major streamer, like I'd love to see this on Netflix for a month and see what it does. That would be the most interesting thing. So my answer is I don't know. I would probably go with a 4, just because I truly think that like you put this in front of kids' eyes, I think something could happen. But I don't know for sure. And right now it's like, they're not watching it on Peacock.
Well, let me put an extra asterisk on it. Not only would it have to be on Netflix, but promoted by Netflix, because I think
they don't do that.
Yeah, it's one
Unless
thing
it's
if you're going to
extraction.
have it on your home screen, but to actually be suggested to people as something to watch, I think is much bigger to their overall algorithm than just burying it deep within their library. So overall, Andrew and I think, have the only 2 scores out there. We still need to have both of your scores, so we have a kind of a compromise level. Dad, what do you come down?
I have a 4 for the industry. I have a 2 point. I'll go with a 3 for the public, simply because I waffled back and forth. I'll stick with the 3, I guess, for the public. It's just not that a film that's in the consciousness that much. I mean, the very informal straw poll I always conduct to my staff. 2 people had seen the film.
The people who hadn't seen it, had they heard of it?
No.
Okay, interesting.
I mean, we have like 20 people in our office who are all Midwestern white. Central Wisconsin, rural Wisconsin. But this is not translating to a non-liberal audience, and that's half the country. And that's part of the reason that I went where I did. Now, I'm not as low as the 7 that Dana gave it, for anybody who's doing the math at home. But
I had a 4 and a 3, a 7. Okay.
Yeah, I can't picture it not being a 5
I'll
in the
go
industry.
up on the industry to 4.5. So I'll go with a 7.5 overall.
Okay, so we have a 9.5, an 8.5, and a 7.5. This might be an interesting compromise here. Sean, where do you come down?
I think I'm going to go with a 5 for the industry, just based on the sight and sound polls, and then I'll go with a 4 for the audience. And that, my 4 has that asterisk of, like you said, put on Netflix and then promoted by Netflix. I would wonder what like people would think, because I wonder what Midwestern like conservative whites would think of this movie. Now they'd have to get past the fact that it's Spike Lee, the fact that it, like, you know, the fact that like it's an all black cast pretty much. They'd have to get past that stuff. I do think if they would hit play, there'd be something interesting there. So that 4 is out of hope. That 4 is out of a pure hope and positivity. So I'm a 5 and a 4.
I can dash all that hope if you just want to drive around the neighborhoods in central Wisconsin.
I mean, yeah, I'll just say this much. My brother-in-law swore to me he would never watch a Spike Lee film. And then I showed him Inside Man, and he's like, that was really good. I said, yeah, it was directed by Spike Lee.
Hates it. Dog shit.
No, he still enjoys it, but, you know. But I think it's the perception that everything Spike does is racially coded. That's like the one movie where he's just kind of a little bit outside of his normal window.
It is weird though, because I don't picture. Maybe it's just I've grown up with Spike my whole life. I don't picture him anymore as racially coded. I picture him as just the Knicks guy. He's just the guy who sits courtside and watches basketball. Like I don't think there's.
Me want to not watch his movies then.
But I don't think I don't think he's viewed as dangerous anymore. Whereas maybe at one point in time, people thought him as like a dangerous filmmaker. I don't think people look at Spike that way, because look at how much he's doing with the teaching in schools for film studies up in New York. Like he's become an educator at this point. He's very seasoned in film history, which it shows in the film. I just think Spike, I don't think he has the reputation that sometimes you think he does, or the initial Do the Right Thing episode laid claim to.
He's about
you think he's rebranded like Snoop Dogg?
Yeah, he's taken the Snoop Dogg route. He's become an ambassador of goodwill. Because it's crazy. Every time I turn on TCM, Spike's doing an interview there. Like he's everywhere. And I don't, like I said, I think he's crossed over into white culture more than some of you guys maybe lead on, because I'm in the Midwest, the right in the dead center Midwest. People know who Spike Lee is around here in my white community.
Okay, so we need to find a final number for this category. We currently have a 9.5, a 9, an 8.5, and an outlier 7.5. So
maybe cut the two ends off, the high and the low, and find a middle ground.
Well, I would be the middle
low
point
during this podcast.
8.5 would be the median right now, unless you want to really hammer on that it's got to be a 9, Andrew.
Settle for an 8.5, Andrew. I don't know about you.
I could live with an 8.5.
All right, Dad?
That's fine.
All right, so our new score after all of that is an 8.5, so we move up a half a point.
It's the next category where it's going to get contentious, my friends.
Our original impact and significance score. Now, for our newest guest, who already is self-proclaimed that he doesn't prepare very much. He just kind of sits down and does the podcast. So we should be thankful that he watched the movie. Yep. Impact and significance is a measurement of both the industry and the audience impact, as well as, you know, anything significant coming out of the movie, how it promoted its cast, its director, anything like that within the 5 years after its initial release. So the 5 years that we threw out before, that now comes back. And we have roughly 1989 to about 1993, 1994. How did this movie change or make ripples within the industry and the audience at large? The original impact and significance score on our first episode was a 4.5. Andrew, did we get this right or wrong?
So wrong.
I'm sensing a theme. Now, why?
I honestly thought it was a glitch when I looked at the website. I was like, there's no way you gave it a 4.5. And then I listened to the episode and I'm like, oh my God, you guys gave it a 4.5. I mean, that blows me away. Like that is so, it's so low. It's crazy.
Is that out of 5 or 10?
That's out of 10.
Out of 10.
That's what I said. I was like, this is crazy. I thought it was a typo. I think, okay, there's a lot you could put into this, but I'll say, just look at, even in the short term, in the 5 years, even though it takes a little longer to come to fruition, Spike changed the way African American film directors were viewed post Do the Right Thing. And if not for the success of Do the Right Thing in terms of the first 5 years, you don't get Barry Jenkins, Steve McQueen, Ryan Coogler, Jordan Peele, Antoine Fuqua. All these great black directors are all swimming in the wake of the wave that Spike dropped on us in 1989. And it all comes out of the first 5 years. It was like, that was like the genesis point. I know there are directors, there's the Melvin Van Peebles of the world and stuff, but Spike changed the game in those 5 years from Do the Right Thing.
Can you define success? You said the success of this movie.
The movie was an $8 million budget, and it did, I believe, over 40. I would call that success given the budget. Maybe
$6
30
million budget, 37.3 roughly worldwide.
That is success. Office. That is success in terms of scale relative. 100% success rate on that. And you're talking Academy Award recognition to a degree. You're talking incredible critical reviews. Roger Ebert at the time. This had tremendous success, and it was almost entirely a black cast and crew in front of the camera, behind the camera. Changed the game.
So do you want to posit? The Academy got itself into, great position by nominating for an acting award the one white guy.
Yeah, but when Spike Lee made his next big Oscar contender, a Black Klansman, they did end up. They also just nominated Adam Driver. But wait.
I was going to say they awarded Denzel's Oscar to Al Pacino. So
well, that was because they awarded Al Pacino's Oscar to Art Carney.
Yeah, I know.
There was a 8-level.
There's 3D chess with the Oscars.
Oh, sorry.
Anyway, Andrew, do you want to put an official score out there for us to consider?
I know I'm gonna be high, man, which is fine. I think 8.5 is, and what I'm saying is, I'm saying 4.5 for the industry. Again, this changed the industry. It fundamentally changed the way black film directors were viewed. Period. I give it a 4 on the public. Again, relative to the budget, it was a box office success in terms of the difference in what it made versus what it cost. It did well critically. It did well at the Academy Awards in terms of getting some minor love. I watched the Cannes press conference right after the film aired. People immediately gravitated towards the power of the film during the very first screening. It's hard to not give this thing very solid marks for what it did. And in the 5 years right after this, Spike does Mo Better Blues, Jungle Fever, Malcolm X, Crooklyn. He sort of rode the wave of this thing all the way to a really strong 5 years.
All right, Dad. Our 4.5. Did we get it right or wrong?
No. I will agree it was low. And I'll agree with the industry being 4.5. Okay. But simply a $35 or $37 million box office does not mean that this had large public following. In fact, the only reason I knew about this film when it was released is because I was a huge Siskel and Ebert fan and watched it every week. Otherwise, I would never saw it. I mean, at the time this was released, I was living in Milwaukee, and I don't remember the film being in theaters. And Milwaukee is by far the largest city in Wisconsin, and with the highest level or highest number percentage of African Americans. No one was talking about this film. So critics did in certain circles, but I can't say that this gets broader public appeal because it was not that prevalent and that well discussed at the time it was released. And it was years afterwards before, I don't think it ever gained any legs. It's not like it was Shawshank where it gained popularity as time went by. It has been something that cinemaphiles want to watch and people who are really into film and such. But I think if you were to give 5 films out to a broad spectrum of 100 Americans of various ages, ethnic backgrounds and regional residences, you're going to end up with about the same amount, which is it's going to be maybe 1 out of every, or maybe 5 out of that 100 would pick it to watch first. So I don't think it's that prevalent. So the public, I'm going to give it a 2.5, simply because at least among the general public, or at least among a certain group of people, it had relevance. But for the broader America and for the general public and overall, I don't think it did. So I'm right at that 7.
Okay, so we have an 8.5 and a 7. Sean, I will offer you the opportunity to go ahead of me or behind me.
Boy, oh boy, how we doing? Sorry, I've had 2. I'll go with,
Have a third.
yeah, we have a second break. I'm going to go with an 8. I think that Dana made some damn good points there, which is turning me into more of a cynical movie viewer, because there's the heart of me that says, so it's 4 and 4. I think industry changed the game. I think that audience, it's just one of these hopeful things I have where well, not even hopeful things. I'll say that, this movie did well successfully, but was not a huge popular, insane hit. Was not the blockbuster that it wanted to be. And it still has stood the test of time. I mean, yes, it got a few Oscar nominations, but nothing huge or a Best Picture nomination or something like that. And it's still being talked about. And yes, it is being talked about amongst cinephiles, unfortunately. But I think that there's something about it where it does last a bit more throughout. And I keep on going back and forth in my head right now, but I will probably give it a 4 and a 4, just for, in spite of that success. I think that, a movie like this would normally have to get a Best Picture nom to be on the radar of a lot of people. And it didn't. And it got a Best Screenplay nomination, losing to Dead Poets Society. Respect to Dead Poets Society. I love that movie, but what the actual fuck? And God bless
Seriously.
him. But also it is something where for a movie like that to get those nominations in an Oscars of 1989, which gave the Best Picture to Driving Miss Daisy, I think there's something special about that alone. And that, well, what I just argued is probably for industry more than audience. I'm going to go 4 and 4. Yeah.
Okay, so we have an 8.5, an 8, and a 7 out there. Bum, bum, bum. The Impending Doom. I have a 4 for the industry. I will not go higher than that. One of the things we have yet to mention is how the critics almost universally were split down the middle. There are some absolutely terrible reviews of this movie that clearly did not get it at the time. And to overlook those as somehow the industry promoting this movie, I just can't get to that point. The simple fact is this has always been a industry created darling, and it is not the other way around. It is not something where the audience came to it on their own. This is something that over time we've had to constantly push on the general audience in a way that we probably haven't for a lot of other films. And the reason I say that is that this is, get this, the number 43 finisher in 1989 at the worldwide box office. Well, Tom, what about the domestic box office? It was 47th. Here are a few of the films that finished ahead of it. Fletch Lives, Dangerous Liaisons, The Accidental Tourist, Weekend at Bernie's, Roadhouse, The Karate Kid Part 3, the worst of the Karate Kid movies, The Naked Gun from The Files of Police Squad, The War of the Roses, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Steel Magnolias, The Little Mermaid, which was only 27th, Major League, Working Girl, Harlem Nights, Pet Cemetery, Uncle Buck, Turner and Hooch. Shall I continue? Twins? Anyone for Twins? Ghostbusters 2?
Turner and Hooch is better than Do the Right Thing. That's just... there's no... I mean, there's no
Tom
argument
Hanks
there.
and a dog. You can't go wrong.
Come on.
But the point of it is that this is not something that, even though it was successful comparative to what its budget was and it made some money, that doesn't make it one of the best known films of a particular year. And the fact that most people hadn't heard of it, it was released at a much lesser known film festival at the time. Cannes has since become a much bigger thing, at least in the American public eye. And it was something that people had to campaign for at the Academy Awards to have it even really be recognized. And it was in a couple of small below the line categories for the most part. Supporting actor, okay, sure. That's kind of a major award. And screenplay to some people is a major award, but didn't win either of those awards. It really wasn't even that competitive. It was kind of like, we'll give you a token nomination for being a good film in this particular year, and a few critics really having something great to say about you. So it's hard for me to give the audience anything higher than a 2. I have a 6. So I am the low man.
That's wild. That is wild, buddy.
I know.
I don't think when we talk about greatness, the scale of greatness, which is ultimately the genesis of this show, the scale of greatness.
Yes.
That is not a direct correlation with box office, in my opinion. I'm not saying you have to rule out box office, but box office does not fundamentally determine popularity always. Sometimes people just go to see a big, boring, or big, dumb movie with a bunch of their family to get out of. I've gone to see some really stupid fucking movies with my kids just to pass a couple hours. That doesn't inherently mean that was like an indication of, yes, I'm happy to give my money to this movie versus something that I didn't see in theaters that I wanted to. I just don't think it's a direct correlation of greatness. And I don't think that the audience works that way. I think the audience often likes to go see big, dumb, stupid stuff.
So I would agree with you in a modern sense, but
it's always been that way. It's always been that way.
I don't think it has always been that way. I mean, look at the 70s. I mean, even to a degree, the 80s, we still had a lot of like big movies that were near the top of the box office that were nominated for Best Picture. Rain Man was the #1 film the year before and won Best Picture.
But that's that's more of an easy popcorny movie in the grand scheme. It's not Gandhi. It's not The Last Emperor. Those movies don't do shit. Okay, like the public likes to go see easy stuff.
And I would also
Do the Right
argue,
Thing is not an easy film to see.
That's true. I will grant you that. But I also would say that our greatness scale, the reason we have it broken out, is that box office by itself is 1/2 of one category contributing.
Correct. And I think it's a small percentage, and I think you're putting too much weight on it, personally.
It ultimately indicates what the perception is. And I've yet to hear, other than the fact that it doubled its box or quadrupled its box office, that you've pointed out any cultural significance of the film. What did it change? What did it impact? Other than the fact that the film had a story that had poignancy and was it was predictive of what was likely to happen over the next couple of decades.
Danny, you can probably speak better to this. Wasn't Rodney King within the 5 years of Do the Right Thing coming out?
Correct.
Because that's a hell of a moment that this movie kind of signaled that, hey, people, there's a flag we're trying to hold up, and then it fucking hits America. This movie is so important. And it resonated a couple of years later with the Rodney King situation and was back in the moment.
Except I don't remember anyone ever comparing and going, you know what? This was predicted by Spike Lee 2 years ago.
But again, we're looking at it through a very white middle American lens. That can't be overlooked.
The only way I would give this additional points up is if you make an argument that it's cast, which for several of them, it was their first film. Martin Lawrence, I don't think this was Sam Jackson's first film, but it's the first one that I really remember seeing him in. And
for Rosie. Yeah,
Rosie Perez, this was also her first film. It puts Spike on a different level with the American audience. I don't know if your director argument holds as much water, given that I think there's only one of those directors who did anything during the initial 5 years. I think that's a bigger point for legacy than it is for impact and significance.
Well, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is it forced the producers and the studios in 5 years to say, hey, over time, we need to start paying attention to African American voices, which led eventually to, because John Singleton was doing stuff in 1991 with Boys in the Hood. Spike changed the game. You're forgetting how much this movie changed the perception of African American directors. John Singleton, 2 years later, Boys in the Hood's another one of those seminal films of this era for that culture.
even if I'm to argue, and I won't argue against Boys in the Hood, a movie we have yet to cover, but is definitely eventually going to be on the list. Even if I were to argue that an extra half point in the industry, it's still not getting over my 2 on the audience at large. Like, how recognizable was this to people at the time? It wasn't like a big blockbuster rental after the fact either. I mean, it's not like people were lining up to try and, I gotta go get the new Spike Lee movie. Malcolm X was not a big movie either. It ended up being more nominated at the Oscars, I'll grant you that. And there are other films that he had in between these two that I thought, were decently successful. But it's not like he became an overnight sensation until he was getting into controversy with Reggie Miller.
Well, no, I mean, the Nike commercials came out even before Do the Right Thing. He was huge at that moment in time. Culturally, he was huge. He was in the Jordan and Bird stuff. Like, he was right there very much in the 80s. He was a monumental figure in African-American culture, in the 80s. He's the reason why the sneaker game became a thing.
All right, the highest I'm going to be willing to go is a 7, and even that I feel is a little bit overinflated.
I can live with a 7.
I think there's too many swaths of America that really had a significant backlash, much like the white critics at the time, even some black critics at the time that just didn't get this movie.
But
it challenged them. It challenged them.
Yes, I would agree with that. Like, I don't think they're right, but we're also trying to voice the opinions of people 35 years ago. So that's also hard.
Well, and as much as you want to say that it showed producers and such, there's a reason why Tyler Perry needed Oprah's money to finance his first films, because it just wasn't coming. I mean, it was an incredibly untapped market of African American for TV and films, and I just didn't see that this really changed much in that area. Maybe he became an icon within that community, but if he did, it didn't last or go. It didn't go beyond. It's not like, it wasn't a film where people said, you need to go and see this. You're going to be uncomfortable watching it, but you need to go see it. It just wasn't discussed.
I'm trying to think. There have only been 5 or 6 African-American directors nominated for Best Director. And I think we talked about it on the 2005 episode and the 2014 episode. There are only a handful of, I guess, non-white winners to ever win it as well. And I don't think there's ever been an African-American winner.
No, there isn't. Steve McQueen didn't win, but 12 Years a Slave won, and that was like the closest.
Yeah,
and Jenkins just lost to Chazelle for Moonlight.
Correct. And the only other one where it was close was the year 2009, I think, for Precious was
Lee Daniels.
Lee Daniels was very close to winning that over Catherine Bigelow.
It was such a weird one. Bigelow and Cameron and Tarantino. That was a weird year where like those movies were fighting hard.
Yeah. But I think we've had 3 different Asian winners at this point and more women than we have black directors. So I still have yet to see that like the total impact is felt, and we're 35 years out. I would agree with you that black directors have had a much easier time in the last 15 years than they had prior to that, but that's still a ways out from this movie. And we're talking about in the initial 5 years. I guess, where is your compromise point?
Well, it's your guys' show. So whatever score you guys want to give it, I don't think I can go lower. Come on, man. I couldn't go lower than an 8 personally. I just think it's too impactful. If you guys go 7, I'm not gonna have any ill will towards you.
You come out hard and then you take the wee way out on the back end.
You went 4.5 to start. You deserve some shame for this, and I'm gonna hold your feet to the fire a little bit. And if you have to squirm around to give it a 7, that's fine. But a 4.5 is an egregious error, almost as egregious as Driving Miss Daisy winning. And so I have to let you kind of sit with that for a second.
I don't need to sit with it. I already have come up quite a bit on that point, and I'm fine with it. That's the whole point of a revisit is to question whether you are right or wrong in the moment.
I just think he's such a trailblazer. I think it's hard to fathom a trailblazer's path in the moment.
All right, so we have one person who's already willing to compromise. We have one abstention. Dad, You were at a 7, I think. So
Yeah,
any
I was
disagreement?
at a 7, and that's where I kind of am. I mean,
All right, let's move to novelty. We have this last category before we get to our second commercial break. So, originally on this category, and recently I've started to divide this category as well between originality and execution. We both had a 10 for a 10 overall average. I see no reason to change that.
I'd like to make
Anybody
it a 4.5.
on which side?
No,
Total?
I'm a 10. This is a 10, easily.
we can leave it at that.
For sure.
Okay. No disagreement. We will leave it as a 10. I figured we wouldn't have too much of an issue trying to get through that one. So we have 3 more categories to go with. But before we do, well, let's take our second commercial break, and we'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, as of this last month, all of our episodes are also now in video format. That's right, you can see my resting nerd face and all of Dana's famous OKs in pristine high definition. So far, we have 8 different episodes now available to watch. Just head to youtube.com/@gmotepodcast, where I have the full video and audio feeds on our website, ronnieduncanstudios.com/gmotepodcast. Both of those are in the episode description of this episode, so check us out there, and if you do, please like the video or subscribe to us. We would really appreciate it. Now, this is the first time we will ever do this, but we have a second Ask Dana Anything segment. Our guest has reminded me that he had some secret questions to bring up to my co-host here, and he is apparently saving all of you out there who have done so poor at giving us new Ask Dana Anything questions, excluding V from our previous episode on Rear Window. She gave us a great question in our first segment, but Sweet Dick Andrew, I turn the mic over to you.
Well, you threw the bat signal out there for everybody, and I was like, well, I got to bring the goods for this one. And so many of your recent guests have brought some really good ADAs, so I wanted to have a few. So first one for you, Dana. We have a math teacher in the room with us right now. I have to ask you, how were you at math in school?
I was poor in math in general. It wasn't until I got to college that I found out that I think it's called calcula. I reverse numbers in my head, kind of like dyslexia. And so I would study and I'd have the formulas right, and I'd always have the wrong answer. And it was always so frustrating. Well, then I find out, because I was doing a job for summer or for early fall at the local public library, barcoding. So we'd have to read the barcodes from the scanned card, then on the book itself. And I'd always go 6-4. What, you mean 4-6? Oh, yeah. Well, and the girl I was working with was an education major. She brought a test and gave it to me during our break. And I'm like, she says, boy, you really screw up numbers really bad. So yes. So I was not bad. I did really well at geometry because there was a lot less numbers and a lot more logic. And that actually was the class I enjoyed of math the most. So I'd like to know, with a little bit of training, how much better I would be going back now and trying it again.
Well, I have a really bad feeling this next question is going to go terribly off the rails, given what you just said there. How many numbers in pi can you recite?
Really? 3.14.
Yes.
159.
More than I thought he would already.
Yeah, there you go.
26.
I don't know, Sean. You're going to have to be my expert on this one.
I mean, I think it's 3.14, 15923, 56.
So he had it right. It was 1415926 5359. Those are at least, I believe, the first 10, according to Google.
Better than your son anticipated, Dana. So
that's
nice
correct.
Job on that
he
one.
Also got like 5 more than I would have.
It's not like I've looked at pi in a long time, unless it's Apple.
Well, it was because Pi Day is always on March 14th. And on March 14th, 2015, it was a really exciting day for us math teachers. God.
Get crazy in the math department, huh?
It got
You have
nuts.
to look forward to those moments.
Okay, third question for you, Dana. You mentioned this on the 1942 episode of my show that will be up in September. You mentioned that you met Matthew Broderick, but you didn't share a ton of insight on exactly what the hell happened with Matthew Broderick, other than it didn't sound like it went well. So can you elaborate?
So it just happened to stumble on this one time when my wife and I were in New York, and we realized that people actually stand around the stage doors after you go to a Broadway show, and the actors will come out and talk to you, sign autographs and whatever. So we happened to see it was a revival of I think it was a Cohan play from the 30s. But it was renamed The Sweet Smell of Success. Matthew Broderick starred in it. We're kind of standing around, and I was, fine. I enjoy the producers. And so I thought, that's kind of interesting. He came out with a person. He goes, no, I can't talk to anybody. I don't feel good. I can't. And he did that the whole way from the stage door to the limousine. I'm like, why would you do that? I mean, it just sounded like the biggest weenie thing I've ever seen in my life. And I'm like, I lost any respect I had for him because, fine, you're sick. You just go, I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well, and go and get in the car. You don't the whole way. It just was ridiculous.
I was worried it was going to be a bad story because I was like, I like Matthew Broderick so much in Ferris Bueller, and I was like, please don't ruin my childhood. But I had a feeling it was going to
sick, just like in that movie.
There you go.
Yeah,
he had a lot of practice. Okay.
So just for clarification, the Sweet Smell of Success is a musical created by Marvin Hamlish on music, Craig Carnelia on lyrics, based on a book by John Guare.
Well, it's
So,
got this one. I'll have to look at my playbill. I have a copy of it still downstairs. I'll look, but I know for a fact it was based on songs that were from it was either Gershwin or Cohan, and it was entertaining and such. I mean, I've met a lot of actors outside of the theater. I mean, I met Ralph Fiennes outside of the theater.
Save that one for Heather. She's a big Ralph Fiennes fan. Mark that first.
He is extremely nice man. I mean, you can't imagine. The only actor I've met that I think was nicer was David Hyde Pierce. He stood and talked to my wife, who was a huge fan of his, from what was the stupid film that she loved?
It's Send Me No Flowers.
No. That's in original.
Oh, excuse me, Down with Love.
Down with Love. And she loved that film because she's big on Pillow Talk and Rock Hudson and Tony Randall. And she mentioned how much he reminded her of Tony Randall in his films and so much of what he did. And he was so, he said that he was a childhood hero of his and such. And we talked for probably 5 minutes. I'm trying to remember how many actors and actresses I've met either outside of the stage door
Brian
or
Dennehy.
whatever. Yeah, Brian Dennehy. I went to a political event while Ed Asner was president of the Screen Actors Guild. So I actually had a cocktail with him talking about union issues.
Hopefully the listeners will send some more Ask Dana Anythings about your celebrity interactions, because I wanted to get the ball rolling on that one for you.
Actually, I think back, and I'm this little old me from Beloit, Wisconsin, whose parents never graduated, or my dad never graduated from high school, and my mom shouldn't have. I actually kind of think back on it and look, and I think I've had a fairly interesting life.
We saw Scott Kahn on the way to the Statue of Liberty.
That's cool.
That was an odd one.
I got one more for you really quickly,
Okay.
Dana. And this is actually going to go out to Dana and Tom. So, yes, two-parter for both you guys. So, I'm doing some weekend spotlights on my Instagram page. I'm highlighting some of my favorite content creators, some of my favorite podcasts. I've got my final spotlight going out to Gmote on the Sunday after this episode goes up. My question goes out to the both of you, and this will be, I'll find a way to get this clipped and put up on YouTube, or pardon me, on Instagram as well. Dana, what are 2 films that best exhibit your love of film and why? Same thing to you, Tom.
For me, it's 2 of my favorite films. One is North by Northwest, simply because it has no real purpose other than to just be suspenseful and entertaining. And there's a certain elegance, both by the fact that it stars Cary Grant and the fact that it was directed by Alfred Hitchcock, that it's just beautiful. The other would be probably Rio Bravo, because it, more than anything, exemplifies my philosophy of life, which is to hunker down and fight with what you have available against the power. And that's
Great
how I
answers.
live my life and how I've built my law practice and everything else. Now, if you ask me for a third, it would probably be between Airplane and Blazing Saddles, simply because at the end of a day, there is nothing I like better when I've had to deal with stress than to just sit down and laugh. To this day, if I'm having a really bad day, MeTV still has Hogan's Heroes on about the time I'm getting ready for bed, and I'll just pop Hogan's Heroes on and watch it, even though I can recite the lines by heart after this many years.
That must explain exactly why you liked Unfrosted.
Yeah.
The only person on earth I
enjoyed
know.
it because I thought it was funny.
No,
It was just enough humor.
I liked Unfrosted as well.
Oh, come on, Sean.
Oh no,
It was not. It's not going to win any awards. It's not artistic.
Movie.
It was just meant to be silly and funny.
If I went on the Stanley Kubrick, it would, or the Rubric, it would be a bad movie. Like, it would get a low score. But so funny that I couldn't help but enjoy it for that purpose alone.
That's why I'm rating movies on a scale of 1 to 10. I do 1 to 5 for enjoyment, and I do 1 for 5 for artistic.
I like that.
And then it averages out. There's some films that are just both. Barbie was one that I think had enough of both that you could give it a fairly high rating.
And Tom, what about you? A couple of films that define your love of the format.
So I'm not going to pick any of my truly top favorite films, but these are both ones that I really enjoy and might be the top one in each of their categories or genres for me. So one, I'm going to go with if it's not my favorite Western, it's like tied for it. I'll go with The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. I think it has a profound thing to say about the finding of the West, about law versus disorder and chaos, and how the country was kind of founded. And it speaks a lot to my personal beliefs on what the country's idealistic version of itself is supposed to be, even if how it came to be doesn't match up with that idealism. The other one I will say, and this is, for anybody that's listened to me long enough, I am a sucker for family drama and romantic comedies, particularly really bad romantic comedies. There is nothing when I'm feeling extra lonely around the Christmas season. Let's turn on something where it's completely formulaic, maybe not quite like Hallmark level, but just hovering slightly above that. Oh, somebody comes home from their big city job to their local town and they find this diner that's going under. The owner is a high school friend of ours who needs some slight polish on him, and he'll find a way out of his circumstances. They'll get together, and all of a sudden it'll be magic. So I'll go with When Harry Met Sally, which might be my favorite of the genre.
I like it. Which is a 1989 film as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
It is.
Yes. My goal with this episode was I'm trying to get this movie above Harry Met Sally on your Gmote list.
So the best film of 1989, even though it's not a best of list, it's a greatest of. All right.
Thanks for taking my ADAs.
You're very welcome. We're glad to have them. Thank you for supplying them. So with that, Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Connie Shuma, 72, South African actress, Black Panther, Black is King, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. She was also a filmmaker. Patty Usatake, 70, American actress, Star Trek The Next Generation, Beef, and Gung Ho. Charlie Cyphers. 85, American actor. Halloween, Halloween 2, Halloween Kills. Sean Martin, 45, American musician, snarky puppy, and record producer, 7-time Grammy winner. George Schenk, 82, American television writer and producer, NCIS. Leonard Engelman, 83, American makeup artist, Ghostbusters, Batman Forever, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Rocky IV, and Moonstruck. Daniel Selznick, 88, American film and television producer. Blood Feud, The Making of a Legend, Gone with the Wind. Hoover versus the Kennedys, younger son of David O. Selznick. Robert Banas, 90, American dancer and actor. West Side Story, Mary Poppins, and Bye Bye Birdie.
And so with that, we will honor these with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. Okay, so we left off at our last three categories. Classicness was the next up on our list, and this category has the least definition of any of them. It is originally started based on whether this movie has aged well or not. Boy, is that going to be hard for this film. We originally gave it a 9.25. Dad, I will let you start. Did we get this right or wrong?
Oh, man, was this hard now that you're thinking about it. This was incredibly hard because of the use of the N-word repeatedly. And boy, I mean,
But
I
isn't that
understand the
authentic?
context of it, and I understand what it was supposed to be, but wow, it's so difficult.
But isn't that authentic to what
I know,
the actual
and
circumstances
that's
are?
where I've been struggling. The other thing I'm going to point out to this is, as a student of history, I learned a long time ago that revolution only happens where there's certain levels of freedom. If in a country that's completely dominated by a totalitarian regime, there's no hope of freedom, so therefore revolution doesn't occur. This film, what ends up happening? It's not the worst of the abusers or the worst of the racists. It's the guy who's always reaching out and telling them, yeah, these people put money in my pocket. And the final scene happens because the kids want to come in and have pizza, even though it was past closing. And he says, oh, no, these are my people. Let them in. We'll give them 4 slices and we'll be done. And this is what happens. So to that extent, it makes it more classic because I think Spike Lee was a genius by doing it that way. This makes it more tragic. So even I started with a 7. The language makes it authentic. I had some problem with it just because. And then I'm going to go back up just because of the mechanism by which the film was done, which is to show that it tends to happen more with people who are more understanding than less understanding. And so I'm gonna go with the 9.5 we originally had and say that was accurate.
So we had a 9.25. You had a
9.25. Yep.
So are you at a 9.5 or a 9.25?
9.25.
See, because revisiting the previous episode yesterday while I was traveling back up north, I would say that I, in the original episode, came down at a 9 and you were at a 9.5. I gave it a little bit more credit off, but I said you could have talked me up to a 9.5, and I'm still not sure why I just didn't go to the 9.5. And instead of averaging this out to a 9.25, it was at a 9.5. The only knock that I have against this is the same one that we said on the original episode, that there's maybe some misconduct by Spike Lee in somebody's first nude scene, in a scene that, for me, I still don't understand why it's in this film. It's not really adding much to the overall ambiance other than to say it's hot. But you've had so much building for probably a good hour plus at that point when it actually happens, that why is it necessary to have that scene included at least that one where it's an actual nude scene. And given the statements that Rosie Perez has made in hindsight, not that she is, has any true animosity towards Spike, they are actually somewhat close friends, I still think. It does detract slightly from the movie for me as to what it's actually trying to say and lessens the impact just slightly. So if I were to give it anything, it would be a half point off. That being said, we talked about relevancy. There might not be a more relevant movie other than maybe Network, which was also name dropped earlier, to where we're currently at as a country, both politically and just culturally. And so I could teeter somewhere between a 9.5 and a 10.
This movie is scary relevant. I would love to live in a world where this movie is not relevant and people are like, wow, like this is insane. This is nutty. This is messed up. And so boy, the points about the nude scene are very solid points. I guess that is just a part of the movie where he's talking about his personal life. And so like they're trying to get into that character a little bit more. Might be a cop out, but I keep on going to that third act and everything about it and everything that's said in it, and I gotta give this a 10 for for aging. I mean, unfortunately, far too well.
Okay, so we have a 9.25, I'll say a 9.5 for myself, and a 10. Andrew, do you have the completion trifecta and go for a 9.75?
I don't. We're all in the same ballpark. I don't have a 9.75. So when you sent the outline in this category, you have, has the movie aged well? Are there things in here that are now uncomfortable? Are there things ahead of their time? Does the movie still have an effect on you? All of those are very strong yeses. The one thing, and I'm glad you guys, Sean and Tom, I'm glad you both mentioned the nude scene. I have also kind of had questions about that scene, and especially listening to the first episode of Gmote when you guys talked about it. So I reached out to a friend of ours who was on a recent episode of Gmote. His name's Adam Freed over at Movie Archer. He was on the Batman episode maybe a month ago or so. Adam's a huge fan of Do the Right Thing. It's one of his favorite films of all time. So I asked him, I said, do you take issue with this? Because I know it's really important to him. And he said, and he let me quote him on this, he said, it's all Mookie and Tina share together. Broken promises and the act that created their son. The non-sex nude scene may not be necessary, but he thinks it sheds meaningful light on their relationship. And I thought that was really interesting, that it kind of highlights the broken nature of their relationship, even though I understand it does have some exploitative nature about it. At the end of the day, though, I've given this a 9.5 on Classicness, just because I had to dock it a little bit for that nude scene, which does kind of still bother me. So, but I'm comfortable with anything we end up in.
If you take out the, 5-10 seconds of the shot across the breast, I still think the scene works without it.
Yeah.
That would be my only complaint with the whole thing. And for making a rather uncomfortable moment, she's talked about how you can't see the upper half of her, see the head in that particular shot because she's crying while it's going on. So that's never something you want to hear said about it. And again, it's not like she's carrying this like huge axe well after the fact trying to go after him, but it is still something that's about the movie, and I still don't know if it fits. You take that 10 seconds out, we're at an hour 59 and like 37 seconds. Does it really detract that much from the film in the overall vision? And I just think it's something that, for as much as the rest of the film feels specifically targeted in one direction, this is too much of a distraction. I mean, you could maybe equally say that when they're talking about polar ice caps, that's equally a distraction and that doesn't need to be in the movie, but that is building character for those guys that do come up later in the movie. Tina's not in that scene. So I have yet to understand exactly how that fits in with the third act. Maybe with the final scene where he asks Sal if he can go see his son, but I don't know how that contributes necessarily towards their relationship with seeing his son. Maybe when he wakes up in the morning? I don't know. I'm grasping at straws. It's
the only blip on a perfect film for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say 9.5 seems the best suited for me. We have one higher and one lower. Are you guys comfortable with a 9.5?
I can do a 9.5. Yeah, I was sort of teetering as well.
Okay. So our new score then on that would be a 9.5. Rewatchability. We were originally at a 7.5 for rewatchability on this one. We've since adopted the Kieran B test. Shout out to Kieran B, host and creator of the BPC, where we have divided this category between will I put it on of my own volition, and if it is on, when and how do I leave it on. I would say this is probably close to I would put it on maybe once a year to every couple of years. I've now seen it 3 times in the last roughly 4 years. And I don't think I would have it higher because 5s are usually reserved to films that I would watch kind of like when I'm sick because I'm just so familiar with them. But it's getting closer to that. Like I have nothing detracting wise that I still think this is fun. I do think there are parts of the first hour that drag, but once you get to about the last 45 to 40 minutes, this movie quickly goes downhill and it's very easy to watch as far as that goes. So I have probably about a 4 there. As far as leaving it on, I would say that I would probably leave it on for probably a few minutes. I'm not necessarily going out of my way to stop my day or plan to watch all of it at a later date. So that's somewhere between about a 3.5 and a 4 for me. I'll give it a generous 8 because this movie has continued to grow on me with each rewatch. So that would be a half point higher than our original score. Andrew, did we get the rewatchability right or wrong?
You got it just a touch off, in my opinion, but I think, Tom, you have just correctly fixed that error. I also have it as an 8 personally. I've watched it 3 times in the last week. I do love this movie. I think like I said, I think it's a 10 out of 10. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. But I also am the type of person who's 800 movies deep into the year, and I don't find myself rewatching a lot of things unless I have to for a podcast because I have so much on my plate at all times, movie-wise. So I can't say I'm going to go out of my way to rewatch this anytime soon just because of the nature of everything else I'm watching. And it's not one that I still have like cable, if you will, to a degree. I have a live TV component. It's nothing I'm ever just channel scrolling, and it's never on. So it's not one that I'm just gonna casually find. Like Sean said, it's only on Peacock. I have Peacock, but I don't use it very often unless I'm watching the Olympics. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. I can't say it's something I'm gonna come to often. But if I did go past it, I feel like I would be inclined to turn it on because over 20 years almost now of having this film in my life, I feel like the characters are so lived in and the world is so built together that I enjoy being in the world that Spike created. So I love it, but it's just not one I go back to. So I think an 8's where I land on this.
Don't knock Peacock. You and I watch it plenty. About 3 days after this episode will be released, it'll be football season again.
Well, it does a terrible job with the Premier League because you can't start something like 30 minutes after it started. I have problems with Peacock.
I've figured out a way, but that's all right. All right, Dad, did we get this right or wrong?
The situation is I give a film rewatchability a 7 if it's a film I should revisit periodically just because it's important. And so I'm at a 7 for that reason. I just can't go any higher because, it's a film that is really good, but it's not one that I think I need to rewatch more than every once in a while. This is a film that I might get or suggest to somebody if we're trying to find a film to watch because of its nature and its quality. But I'm just not going to it that often after that. The subject matter is heavy to me. I would have to be in the right frame of mood to watch it, for when it's not for the show. There's only a handful of films I rewatch on a regular basis. This isn't going to be one of them, so I'm at 7.
This is the hardest one for me because I don't rewatch things. I never rewatch movies. I need to because there's too many movies out there that I haven't seen that I spend all my time watching new movies all the time. So rewatchability is like one of the hardest things for me. Okay, that being said, two things. I think I would go an 8 because if it was on, I think I would stop and watch it. And then in the other aspect of it, the way I actually, because I don't rewatch movies, the way I grade rewatchability is do I, think about something and then upload that YouTube clip and watch it. And that's going to be an interesting one for Do the Right Thing. I've never done that for Do the Right Thing. Like, an example obviously is A Few Good Men. do I sometimes just think about that courtroom scene, that final scene, and like cue it up? I literally did it last night when I couldn't sleep. For Do the Right Thing, do they have that sort of rewatchability? This is going into the Rewatchables podcast, most rewatchable scene. I think that could be there. I haven't done it yet, but so that's why I'm going with a 4 and a 4 for these and going for the final 8.
So, because this is such a hard thing to compromise on because it's such subjective taste, I usually average this category anyway, and that would give us a 7.75 between the four of us. So, look at that for math. Okay, so the original audience score on this one was an 8.75 when we revisited it about 2.5 years ago. And it has not changed since. We still are at an 86% for Google users and an 89% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us an 8.75. So, to repeat the categories, we went from an 8 to an 8.5 on Legacy. Andrew can take his victory lap because on Impact and Significance, we went from a 4.5 to a 7. From Novelty, we went from a 10 to a 10. On Classicness, we went from a 9.25 to a 9.5. On Rewatchability, we went from a 7.5 to a 7.75. And audience score remained the same at an 8.75. So, our final score will be 51.5. Now, our original score had this at a 48, so it has moved up 3.5 points from number 78 on our current list. And anyone want to make a prediction?
42.
I was literally looking at that list earlier this morning. 40.
All right. Andrew, are you ready for this?
Yes.
It comes in at number 32.
Okay.
1 spot higher than Psycho, and 0.03 points ahead of When Harry Met Sally.
We did it, folks. We did it.
Redemption.
That was the only goal of coming on this episode.
Wow. And I thought it was just because you liked us.
Oh, you had to know it wasn't.
It was fun fighting with Dana a little more. We were too buddy on Gaslight.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah.
But then again, most guests agree with him more often than they do me. I have to be the straight man in this situation. He gets to be the fun, happy-go-lucky mascot of the show.
Well, we know who's the one funding the hats and the tumblers and the eventual gold jacket at 20.
Ah, so you're tying this to an incentive goal. Okay,
yes,
that makes
absolutely.
more sense. More sense.
Stay thirsty, my friends.
If you disagree with any of our scoring, you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com or find us on any of our socials at Gmote Podcast on X, Letterboxd, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. Can't forget the Instagram for our Scooby-Doo villain there. He was worked so hard in his retaliation, saying that we needed to get more followers. I felt like we were in a plateau, and he responds by giving us an additional 300 followers, and I don't get it. How that was somehow a punishment.
Whoever that guy running your social media is he's doing a hell of a job.
Yeah, I can't fault him there.
True. Very true.
All right, remaining questions for this one. Does Mookie save Sal?
No.
This is a tough one. Him throwing the garbage can through distracts them from riding against the actual person Sal, and they instead go after the actual store. It's a solid argument. I don't know if that was his idea, that was his intention, if you will. It's tricky. I'd say no as well, but with a hesitation.
I would like to say yes, because it does exactly that, in my opinion. However, given how we've been set up to believe, or what we are set up to believe about Mookie up to this point, is that he doesn't really think much about his actions. He is almost all id. He just kind of does things.
Yeah.
And so for him to have that level of forethought and planning to do something that is in the moment, where you could just see as easily that he was caught up by emotion and that was not his intent, I'm going to say it's a yes and no. He does end up saving Sal, but that was not necessarily his intent.
I don't see it. I just don't.
Okay. Are we forced to choose only between love and hate?
No.
Yeah, we covered this one. It's sort of like this film sort of like dives into the complexities of a mix of the two. I mean, there's a blend of those two, and that's what makes this movie almost messy. Is that real life is messy, and that you can't be a villain or a hero. We see people fluctuate between villain and hero so many times throughout this movie that I think that's so tricky to really go back. And villain and hero is different from love and hate, but the binary choices in there.
Agreed.
Is this one of the most egregious Oscar omissions ever?
Yes. I don't want to tip my hand in case whenever 1989 comes up on my show, but it's ugly.
Singing in the Rain's got to be up there for me.
Singing in the Rain's up there.
1952.
Citizen Kane's up there.
Citizen Kane was at least nominated for Best Picture.
Was it actually nominated for? I forgot.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was,
that was when they were doing 10 nominees.
It wasn't covered in any of the Hearst newspapers.
Yeah, the Hearst killed that one. Yeah, he yeah, I think this is a bad one. I'm trying to think of like other ones.
The Dark Knight comes to mind.
Dark Knight is a rough one. There's just
Saving Private Ryan versus Shakespeare in Love.
That was,
but again, those were both up for Best Picture.
And he got
We're talking like an omission. Yeah. In no world does this actually win Best Picture.
No.
In 1989, it's not going to.
But
the possibility of recognizing it over something else that year, that might be.
But I will say, to a large degree, I think it's good that it didn't win Best Picture, because I think that has actually elevated the film over time.
And that goes back to our discussion previously, I think, on your 2014 episode of how the Oscars is set up to fail.
Yeah.
Correct.
And it actually helps promote movies sometimes that are overlooked.
That's why I love the Oscars. It's because they get it wrong. People are like, the Oscars never get it right. I hate watching them. I'm like, that's why I like watching them. I like, I like seeing what, like, at that time was popular to the culture, which was Driving Miss Daisy, which was a white racist woman, like, befriending a black man, and like that, making people feel better about that. And it's fascinating. Like, it's a time capsule where I'm just like, wow, yeah, like, Do the Right Thing, of course, would like make it into the Best Picture conversation.
Okay, that's why it won Best Picture. Do the Right Thing inflamed racism in America, and Driving Miss Daisy solved it.
Yeah, exactly. We're good now. We're set.
Thank you, Morgan Freeman.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we go back to our listener questions before I get to any of your remaining questions. Peterson W. Hill also had, is this the most important American film ever made?
No.
No.
But I think it's in the conversation.
If you're going to say no, I would ask you to at least nominate what you think might be there.
I would say Citizen Kane, and I know that's going to just irritate the hell out of you, Tom, but I just I just think it's kind of a landmark in American cinema.
I think this was a pivot, and I think this was an interesting pivot for movies in general. Like, for something that was so low on box office, and like so like it to still have this lasting impact, I think is interesting. And for it to be in such a strange way, I know it's not the first film to ever break a fourth wall and talk to the character, but to do it in such a like fascinating way, like everyone like all of a sudden like working through the like yelling slurs halfway through it, and like that being like, well, that's just this random thing. How can that ever in a million years work? And it does. It works really well, and it just epitomizes where we are. And so I think like the crazy, I think you said it, Andrew, like the punk rock style of it is just like, yeah, like this guy was rebellious in cinema, and I'd love to see someone who is rebellious in cinema going against convention. And there's other examples of it, of course, throughout cinematic history, but this is one that like is very prominent.
I know this is going to be like an incredibly difficult question to answer. I think it's easier to just say no and then leave it at that. It's really hard to then nominate a subsequent film that you would place over it. Personally, I think if I were to try and explain America through a movie, either Casablanca, which I think is America's thought of what it is, and its idealistic version of itself, what we think is the self-sacrificing Rick, passing off what we actually want for the greater good. That's what we think of ourselves in Casablanca, but that's not actual, like, what we are. Then there's The Godfather, which could be seen as kind of our succession and our immigrant upbringing. You could probably bring that in there. Our capitalistic culture, it has a lot of progressions of all those things. But then how do you discount part 2, which I think has just as much contribution to the overall aesthetic of The Godfather? You can't have just the rise. You also have to have the fall, and they're two halves of the same whole. Unfortunately for part 3. Like, where do you go exactly with what it is? I mean, I could nominate something like Network has been brought up a few different times. All the President's Men could possibly be in that same conversation. There's a part of me for a certain portion of America that Taxi Driver might be the most representative of America right now. I don't know where to pick, but this does highlight a distinctly, I think, somewhat American, or at worst, modern democracy problem. I mean, I don't think we're exclusively the only country that's dealing with immigrant populations and racial backlash and such anymore.
Yeah.
Given the nature of what's also going on with the far right in Europe. I mean, as we're seeing a lot of things reoccurring in Germany, or, Denmark is having some issues, and obviously
Britain.
Le Pen in France, and Britain having its far right party, even though they've been kind of like ostracized by the recent elections. I mean, that stuff's still resurfacing, but we're only seeing those primarily in modern democratic or very liberal democracy type countries. Because even those that you would say that there's additional racism, such as the Uyghur problem in China, or the issues with the Modi government in India, that's more of the government-sponsored racism as opposed to, just tension within the culture, which is contributing towards the politics. So it's hard for me to say that this is uniquely American either, but it's probably pretty close, because we are the country that is trying the hardest to try out this model and see if it's even possible to be successful.
Problem you're having right now is you're trying to have one size fits all, and it doesn't. There's different portions, compounds, strata of America that exist, and different movies at different times are going to be more prevalent depending on what is the focus. So I don't think you can ever really name it other than the movie at this moment. I think it'll change in a day.
All right, so we'll leave that one slightly unanswered. Apologies to Peterson. He'll have his own say here in a few weeks when he makes his first appearance. But you can follow him at Peterson W. Hill on Instagram. We also have a question from Chauncey Talese at Big Chaunce 64 on X. What would be the ripple effects if Spike had won the original screenplay?
Ooh, man, that's a great question.
You wouldn't have won for BlacKkKlansman.
True.
Yeah, I don't know what would have won, but it wouldn't have been like that was a makeup win. Not to disrespect BlacKkKlansman, but that was easily a legacy win.
Sure, but would it have had a similar effect of what Tarantino's win for original screenplay in '94 for Pulp achieved?
Could have. I mean, if he wins the screenplay here, and if he continues making the same movies he makes, if you live in that alternate universe, maybe Malcolm X pushes him into more of the best picture conversation because he's already got the screenplay under his belt. Maybe he makes that next step. I don't know. It's a really interesting hypothetical. I would like to think that he would have made another step with one of his subsequent films and been more in the conversation for best picture.
He would have been more bankable. And my guess is he would have been offered to direct other films. And so a lot of his filmography would not exist.
Right.
Yeah.
So you would say he'd be more commercialized?
Yes.
Okay. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. I guess I can see the point of that, where he would be co-opted and probably reformed a little bit by the studio industry itself. Brought into the more popular, you're now one of us type of thing, as opposed to being somewhat of an outsider.
Yeah,
that would make sense.
Like we had talked about with him sort of being punk rock in his DNA to a degree, you know, like I feel like he kind of likes the abrasiveness of being counterculture or counter to the industry to a degree, you know, and I think that works for him really well.
You kind of have to be a Knicks fan.
True.
I mean, that's sadomasochism. All right. So, any remaining questions for either of you? Or any of you?
Would you have eaten that pizza? Because that looked like dog shit.
So,
And I saw I'm sure you're going to give the trivia on it.
Yeah, they only had 2 pizzas that they could afford, so they kept reusing the same pizza over and over.
Well, so as I'm watching the second time, I'm watching Turturro cut the pizza, and I'm like, he's the worst pizza cutter I've ever seen on film, and I made a note of it. And then I saw the Rewatchables episode today, and I understood why, and because he was air cutting basically. But yeah, that's wild. They couldn't afford more than 2 pizzas for 8 weeks of shooting.
I still love a place that just does a slice. I mean, like, I know, like, that's everywhere in New York, but, you know, like, these days, you're like, walking down the street and you can just grab a slice somewhere is just such a cool concept that, you know, where I live, it's just, you buy a whole pie. You're not going to buy a slice, like, you're not walking around. You're driving around everywhere. So, but there is that level of nostalgia. Like, whenever I visit a friend in New York, I always like stuff like I don't even look for a recommendation. I was like, hey, pizza place, slice. And so it's probably not that good. I'm probably pretty drunk, and so I don't really care how good it is. But for that alone, I don't know. It's tricky. I had the trouble with. I've just been so miserable. Like thankfully it's been cool lately. But like the heat waves and stuff that I was just like, I don't want pizza right now. Give me a piragua icy, like and they had the shaved ice in there like that. That looked way better.
Okay. Well, I have a remaining question. I just want to ask you what you think of a very young me and that little thing sitting there in his mom's lap.
I like the haircut on you, Dana.
That's when I was it was brown. It used to be blonde, and then it got dark, and then it got gray, and then it got white.
Is that from like a Sears or a JCPenney or where's
I don't remember.
From?
It might have been a church photo, like one of those type of things. But this would have been about 1992, 93. 92.
Yeah, it had to be 92 because otherwise you would have had another small human in the included in the picture. Now, for those of you on audio, you will have to go over to the YouTube feed in order to see the picture that he's demonstrating. I should mention that here.
Yes, he didn't have any hair there neither.
That's why I'm wearing a hat.
Low blow, just right out.
Yeah, he likes to highlight that he has hair, feathered and lethal.
Still
that's
have
why
have
he's the
mine
White
thinned.
Goodman of this podcast. So, anywho, thank you to both of our guests. Andrew, you will be back soon for our. I think the next time you're on is that Barry Lyndon or
no,
do you have
I'll be
one?
back in November to. We're gonna put up our
right.
Dukes. We're gonna have Fight Club, buddy. We're gonna have Fight Club. We can't talk about it.
We don't.
Much.
Yeah, we don't talk about that. That's why I skipped over it. It wasn't because I forgot. All right. So, but yes, you'll be back for
then
Fight
the
Club
aforementioned Barry Lyndon.
Okay. Yeah, and your criteria collection. Yeah. Okay. You over prepare you.
I'll watch that at least 3 times.
But remind people what you have going on the Rev Almanac and where they can find you.
Yeah. So again, all the socials at Rev Almanac. You can find the show on every single podcast platform. Just like Gmote, we're on YouTube on video. This episode goes up as the 2014 episode is currently in the voting cycle. September, Tom and Dana are on for 1942. I've also got 2015 on the way still. I've got 1996 on the way still. Closing out the season with Tom and Dana coming back for 1967. And then season 2 kicks off in January. I've got about 27 different guests. Sean is one of those. He'll be in the early part of season 2 for 1956. So we're diving into all sorts of years. Got a whole bunch of great guests lined up for season 2, especially a lot of diversity to the guests. I'm excited.
All right. And Sean, just remind everybody where they can find you and what you've got going on.
Instagram, Math Teacher Movies. Check me out there. I review movies of the past and present. I do Monologue Mondays, Final Shot Fridays, What the Academy Got Wrong Wednesdays, and Top 10 Tuesdays. So I have fun all days of the week.
And the beauty of Sean is he's up early in the morning. So I know, like, first thing when I open my Instagram, I'm going to have a Sean Math Teacher Movies post, almost guaranteed every morning.
Well, and remember, he is an hour ahead of us. So
That's right.
if he's also up early, he's up an hour earlier than us to begin with. So
I'm not far away from having 8-month-olds myself, so I understand the hell you're in right now, Sean.
Boy, oh boy, it's just lovely. It's just a sweet time.
all right, any quick remaining thoughts for the week, Pop?
Nope, not really.
None here either. I am taking a well-deserved deep breath after a lot of 1942 films. I did enjoy the year more than Andrew, but that isn't to say that the prep of 2 months in a row consecutively and roughly, I think it was 74 films over 2 months has not gotten to me.
You're a lightweight. That's nothing.
Okay, I'm not a psycho person like you that watches 4 a day, but okay, whatever. But anyway, that'll do it for us this week. Thank you for listening. I think it was Blessed Are the Cheesemakers. Aha, what's so special about cheesemakers? Well, obviously it's not meant to be taken literally. It refers to any manufacturers of dairy products. Next week, for our 224th episode, we welcome 2 new celebrity guests. The Question Queen, Heather Stewart, and Ryan Luis Rodriguez of One Track Mind Podcast, to discuss our second Monty Python film, Life of Brian from 1979, celebrating its 45th anniversary. Directed by Terry Jones, written by the Pythons, music by Jeffrey Burgeon, starring John Cleese, Eric Idle, Terry Gilliam, and Michael Palin. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at thenewRonnieDuncanStudios.com or at greatestalltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, X, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.
And don't forget, register to vote. The election is coming up. This is Mr. Senior Love Daddy signing off.